Hello everyone, just a quick word from your friendly editor/husband. For all of you who listen to So I'm Watching This Show and own an Android device, do me a favor. Go to the Google Play Store and download the Podcast Republic app. It's a fantastic app that allows you to get all of your favorite podcasts directly on your Android devices. I use the app and love it. I can search for the podcasts I want to listen to, select them as favorites, and have them all just a click away. Make sure you set So I'm Watching the Show as a favorite so you don't miss any new episodes. Again, the app is Podcast Republic, available on your Android device. Thanks!
I named my file Little Wilman.
Jesus Christ. That's not what I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. That's all I can say.
Oh, boy.
You are a delight.
That's one way to put it. This is the first time I've ever been called sir without having them say, "You're making a scene." Hello, everybody. I am Will.
And I'm Kristin.
And this is So I'm Watching This Show. On today's episode, we're going to talk about a couple of Little Women.
We sure are.
Yay!
Two Little Women.
Well, we're technically going to talk about 8 Little Women.
8 Little Women.
The regular death proof over here.
That is there.
Two groups
is
of 4.
Just like death proof. Okay. We're going to get into an extended metaphor about how death proof is the next evolution of Little Women. I'm kidding. I don't know how we would even do that.
So then Laurie shows up with his... shit, I forgot what the car was. I know it. What's the car? Shit.
The white one?
It's... Yeah. Hold on.
Or Stuntman... What even is his name? Man, that's my favorite Tarantino movie.
Stuntman Mike.
Mike, okay.
Yeah, a 1970 Chevy Nova and a 1969 Dodge Charger. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I was like, they say it in the movie.
Yeah, they do.
I could not remember.
Because Zoe Bell's very excited about it.
So, Little Women. Just how small are they? Scary little. So, well, that's a good place to start. I knew nothing about Little Women. All of my knowledge and my entire frame of reference for Little Women is that episode of Friends where Rachel reads The Shining and Joey reads Little Women.
These Little Women. Wow.
So I knew Beth was sick. I knew Beth dies.
Beth dies.
Beth dies? Is that true? If I keep reading, is Beth gonna die?
I knew Laurie was a boy and Joe was a girl, and that was it.
Damn.
Did you read it?
I have read it. It's been a long time, but I have read it and Little Men as well. And I guess there are 4 books. I've never read the other 2, but I've read those 2. And I have watched the 94 version so many times.
I was going to say, it's one of those movies and books that really feels like a rite of passage for a lot of young girls, young women.
Yeah, I think so.
It is the story of 4 sisters during Civil War times, which is 1860s Civil War?
Yeah. Look at you.
Yeah, it's, Joe, Beth, Amy, and Scrappy-Doo?
Meg.
Okay, Meg. Meg, I couldn't remember Meg. And after the first movie, I don't think I will remember her.
Well, Emma Watson plays her in the new one.
Okay.
And I can't get into it. I can't get into it yet.
Well, basically, you were very excited about this movie, and I couldn't have been fucked. I was just like, I didn't care. And
the old one, you mean?
The new one, any of it.
Oh, the new one. Okay.
You were talking about Little Women, and I was like, oh, God, I'm going to have to see this, aren't I?
I was, in fairness, I was not making you.
You were not making me. The thing for me is that considering the fact that I do like a fair amount of older things, I tend to view old things as old and boring, and I'm not interested. I'm the person that's drawn to bright, new, flashy stuff. I'm the one that goes to see all the remakes that you people complain about.
What do you mean by you people?
I don't believe you people.
What do you mean, you people?
What do you mean, you people?
Huh?
And so it just kind of, I was like, I just didn't care. And true to form, because I did make sure to tell you that I wasn't against it, but it was just a blind spot for me. And true to form, when it came around, you and Will went and saw it, and both loved it. And then my aunt saw it and loved it. And then I just heard a lot of people talking about it in a way that it started to pique my interest. And
it's a fucking masterpiece.
Yeah. And in particular, I heard that the newer version was a bit more sprightly. It's a bit more fresh, and it's not quite as stilted as some of the more traditional tellings are.
Yeah.
Which, frankly, I think is relatively accurate. I think humanity... It's something I've said several times that I learned from the TV show Spartacus, Blood and Sand.
Oh, God.
Where behind the scenes they were talking about the dialogue, and they were talking about how they wanted to go about it. And they were like, if one thing is true and has always been true about humanity, it's that we're very vulgar.
Yeah.
It always has been. There's always been slang. There's always been casual ways of speaking and behaving and stuff. And so I think a lot of people fall into the trap of making old-timey things extra formal.
Yeah, like there is specifically, I agree with you, there's specifically a scene in the old one that I've never enjoyed, and it's when Joe finally comes home and sees that Meg is pregnant, and she says, "Why didn't you tell me?" And Meg just goes, "One hardly speaks of such things." And I'm like, what the fuck? It's your sister. Like, tell her that you're pregnant in a letter, for crying out loud. That always bothered me, and I definitely agree. The new one is a lot less stilted.
Like I said, I mean, I think to an extent that's actually kind of true, that people in privacy, I think we're very casual. And yeah, so I became excited to see the new one. And as such, you kind of insisted, you're like, you got to watch the old one. You might as well.
In my opinion, it is one of the movies that, like, if I were to ask somebody, oh, have you ever seen The Little Women with Winona Ryder and Christian Bale? And they said, no, that's a thing that exists, I would think they're crazy. I feel like everyone should see it, even though it's not the best version. I just think it's crazy that people have never even heard of it.
I was like, I mean, it's not Jurassic Park. Like,
well, no, it's not Jurassic Park, of course, but I just it was so present in my childhood that I don't understand that it wasn't I don't understand how it wasn't for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we watched it, and we watched it last night, and I thought it was fine.
Yeah, it is fine.
For me personally, I found it on the duller side. It was fairly predictable. It was fairly straightforward. And it was very 90s. I think that in its time, it was more exciting.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. It also, if you're thinking about it in 1994 and then thinking about the people that are in it in 1994, it was a lot more exciting than it is now. And I mean, the whole we've talked about her so much. We love Winona Ryder. Think she's great. Girl can't do an 1860s Concord, Massachusetts accent. Sorry, she's not good. It was very like that Family Guy joke. That would be most good, Newman. Most good.
Our parents have consented, and you and I are to be married on the first warm, sunny day of spring.
That would be most good, Newland. Most good.
I'm sorry, but she is just awful. Is there any way, I mean, can we add like a topless scene or something?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
We can? Oh, great. All right, we got a movie.
She doesn't have the same chops that Saoirse Ronan has, and it's sort of like rude to say because I think Winona Ryder is in a very good place in her career now, but the differences are striking, especially the way that all of the women specifically play their characters, because Susan Sarandon is a very harsh marmy in a way that she's not really in the book or the new version. So it was very interesting watching it again, having watched the new one. But yeah, well, I agree, duller for sure.
It seemed very straightforward. Like it is very straightforward. That's what I meant about the 90s, where it was like it seemed like how the 90s were like, this is how we do period pieces in the 90s. Where now definitely. we're always trying to find ways to make. And in particular, the mid to late aughts were making things darker. And now it's a bit more, how do we make it more fun? Like more Guardians of the Galaxy, you know? It's like, how do we inject some personality into it? And because, I mean, there is a romanticism to this time period. And the house, the clothes, the settings, the snow, the summer. And One thing I noticed was I felt like all of them were very telegraphed. All of them were very, like, we're literally introduced to Beth with Marmee being like, how is your cold? And you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so I was like, she's the sick one.
No, totally. It is like Meg is the oldest proper one. Joe is the tomboy who doesn't follow the rules. Beth is the sick, shy one, and Amy is the precocious little one. And so it's like, that's a very rote way to get your archetypes across. But what I appreciate so much about the book and then the new adaptation is that every character is given more. Every character. I mean, Marmee gets more, Joe even gets more, and what previous adaptations, including the 94 one, have done is make it a Joe story with, like, supporting characters, when in reality, it is an ensemble story. Mm-hmm. And it just is that Joe is, quote-unquote, Louisa May Alcott, so she is the, like, writer surrogate, but she's not actually the main character. They are all characters.
Well, because another thing that I didn't fully grasp everything, and you kind of told me, you were like, this is a version for people who already know the story.
Yes, it's like the Harry Potter movies. They are for people who read the books, because our brains are already like, oh well, this is when that happened, so we don't need to see it.
Because the whole, like, I did hear about the book burning thing, and that was so odd because, well, first of all, Amy wanted to go to the opera or something, and
theater.
They wouldn't let her, and so she said, you'll be sorry. And at that point, it didn't even occur to me that Joe was a writer.
Yeah.
Had we seen her writing?
We had, and I think they had already been, like, playing in the attic, and Joe's the one that, like, was writing all of their plays and stuff that they were doing in the attic, but it's not made clear enough, like, just visually. And so having read the book and then also having watched it so many times, I obviously already knew, but someone going into Little Women totally fresh would have no idea what's going on.
Joe comes home and I don't know what she's looking for, first of all.
Her manuscript.
And then second of all, she finds it in the fire, and Amy immediately screams, I didn't do it. And she starts beating the crap out of her. So my mind was like, who did it? Like, I was trying to figure out who did it, and you guys were like, Amy. And I was like, well, Amy said she didn't do it. And
no, she just didn't want to get beat.
Yeah, that was confusing.
I can see that.
Watching it, I was sort of like, it just didn't quite land. Like, the emotional beats weren't landing. All of the information was there. But, and actually, I will say, considering that this was in 94, I really don't think it was horribly dated. The sets and the wardrobe was very nice. The one thing that was very of its time is when Will mentioned all the overhead lighting.
Yeah.
That was very 90s. That was very...
I'll say the lighting in the new one is a lot more natural. It's very good.
I liked Christian Bale, and I did not know that he ended up with Amy. So that was a little bit scandalous for me. I was kind of like, see, Amy was my favorite, so I kind of was... And apparently that's a controversial take.
It is a controversial take until now, because I think we have not mentioned at all that Greta Gerwig has directed the new one.
Well, I haven't seen it yet, so we're not...
Well, we haven't seen it yet. No, I know, but I'm just saying, like, no, I mean, Amy is always portrayed as, like, the young little upstarty brat. Mm-hmm. And she's never really given more of a character than that.
I just thought she was funny. And I mean, Kirsten Dunst is such a particular brand.
Of course, especially in 1994, Kirsten Dunst, totally.
And so the way that her lines, because half the time she's not even on screen, but you can just hear her, "You're one beauty." And
yeah.
It's like, it was pretty great.
No, she's very good. And I think when we were talking about the archetypes before, it's something that so many of these adaptations take as, like, gospel, making these girls archetypes and not letting them be human people. And I think that that's a bad mistake, because that was, like, Louisa May Alcott's whole deal, is that girls are people too. And it's
a fundamental misunderstanding of the source material.
No, exactly. I mean, it's perfectly fine to make a movie out of, because it works. And Joe is obviously one of the more dynamic characters in the source material. But it is very interesting watching a different new type of person interpret the text. Yeah.
I think especially for its time, I can see how it would be good for young people, and I think it was fine. I can't imagine really watching it again.
Oh, I definitely will.
Mm-hmm.
I'll watch it forever. I mean, despite liking the new version a lot more and a lot more actively, I guess, this is like comfort food to me. It's very, I don't know, it's easy to watch. I love the people in it. I especially love Christian Bale's Laurie, even though he's kind of a dick. But Laurie's kind of a dick, so I don't know.
I liked Laurie. I didn't really get, because I knew that about him. And
well, he's kind of a dick to Amy in Paris, but when he's like a scoundrel.
Yeah.
But I love him, and I think...
She can handle it.
No, she can. What's interesting to me specifically is between the two versions is the differences in how the actors play them too. Mm-hmm. I'm very excited for you to see the new one. I really hope you like it. I'm going to be so sad if you don't.
Okay. Well, we're going to go see it, and then we'll talk about it when we're done.
Yay!
I'm working on a novel. It is a story of my life and my sister's.
Make it short and spicy. And if the main character is a girl, make sure she's married by the end.
Ow, Joe!
I want to be an artist in Rome and be the best painter in the world. That's what you want too, isn't it, Joe? To be a famous writer? Yes, but it sounds so crass when she says it.
My girls have a way of getting into mischief.
Well, so do I. This is Meg, Amy, Beth, and Joe.
I intend to make my own way in the world.
No one makes their own way, least of all a woman. You'll need to marry well.
But you are not married, aren't you?
Well, that's because I'm rich.
We can leave right now. I'll sell stories, Joe. And you should be an actress and you should have a life on the stage.
Just because my dreams are different than yours doesn't mean they're unimportant.
I have loved you ever since I've known you, Joe. I couldn't help it.
It would be a disaster if we married.
It wouldn't be a disaster.
We'd be miserable.
Joe, I'd be a perfect saint.
I can't.
We saw Greta Gerwig's Little Women, and when we were leaving, the only real thing I said to you was, I was like, imagine not nominating that movie for Best Direction. Mm-hmm. And the thing about these controversies is that there are 5 slots, mm-hmm. and no matter what gets nominated, at any given moment, there's between 10 and 50 eligible
right
things.
And there also always is a backlog because there are only 5 director slots, but there are 10 best picture slots.
Mm-hmm. And so no matter who gets nominated, they're going to constantly be like, blank was snubbed. How did they manage this and all that? So for me, it's like, it's not the kind of thing, because remember a couple years ago, there was the Oscars so white hashtag. And I think
Oscars still so white, just FYI.
No, I know. I think that whole thing was a good like jump start, a good revving of the engine. But for two things. Number one, I think people the next year voted for some black people, and then we're like, okay, we're fixed.
Yeah,
and
we're
they
done.
just went back.
Good. We're cool. Well, it's a very similar thing where when Catherine Bigelow became like the first woman to ever win Best Director for Zero Dark 30, however many years ago that was, it was the same thing where they were like, well, we gave you one. Mm-hmm. What else did you want? And it's like, I mean, so many things. But...
And it's going to take years, going into decades,
of course,
for the actual change to happen. But I saw a really good tweet. This was a couple days ago, so it was from Philip Henry. And he was talking about how if you don't value, and for conversational purposes, I'll just say black. I think he was a bit more broad, mm-hmm. like people of color, LGBT. Like if you don't value different stories, mm-hmm. they won't get made.
Totally.
And they won't, the perspective won't get out there. And then we're going to be like, you have to put black people in Little Women. It was like, if you won't,
I mean,
well, yes, no, but that argument where it's like, all 4 of them are white ladies, you know what I mean? And so it's like, if you won't also tell black stories and gay stories and like disabled stories and stuff, then we are going to demand that the stories you tell represent that. So it's like, if you want your like lily white period pieces, then you gotta also, you have
to step up to the plate, essentially. And it's like, it's just not happening in a way that like, because I've seen so much stuff about this specifically, about Greta specifically, leaving aside the fact that there were tons of other women directors, female directors this year, who should have been at least considered and were clearly not. The ones that chap my ass the worst are The Irishman and Joker. And it's because The Irishman is nothing that Martin Scorsese has not done before. He's done it so much. And Joker is nothing that Martin Scorsese has not done before. It just is like, so they're both so reductive. And I literally cannot even believe that anybody thinks that those two movies were more original or more unique or better directed in an interesting way than at least Little Women.
Well, and the thing is, it's like, I just said Hustlers, that they said it was rough around the edges. It's like, no, you don't respect sex workers. Exactly. That's what's happening.
I can't even, we don't have time in this episode to get into my opinions on sex work, but it's real work, and it's criminalized, and it shouldn't be, and the men are the gross part of the equation, and it's not the
necessary. Women. World's oldest profession. It's never not been a thing.
Totally.
But you turn your nose up to it, and it's like, if that were, and it's also so gendered. It's gendered female. And so it's like, isn't The Irishman about a bunch of criminals? Like, how is that different than what the girls were doing in Hustlers?
Because they're doing it for their family. So are
There's a 10-minute Christmas scene in the middle of Hustlers that would beg otherwise.
But that's the thing, is like there's this like weird, gross nobility to like organized crime in a way that there isn't for sex work.
Because it's male, yeah.
Yeah, it's atrocious. It's atrocious,
it's macho,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's not just that, because, like, you know, my feeling isn't that we have to have a token female director. We have to have a token person of color director. We have to have a token LGBT actor. It's like, I don't want it to turn into this weird, like, board where we're checking things off.
No, I don't think it should be affirmative action.
But the thing is, it's like when these awards came out, and it's so expected. It's so white. It's so and this was the BAFTAs, this was not the Oscars, but not only were they all blonde women, but it was like they found a way to nominate Margot Robbie twice. Yeah. Look, she's good. I am all for giving her some love, but she just came off, 2 years ago? She just was doing a whole, like...
I don't want to put too fine a point on it, except that I do, because it's also 5 blonde women for the Oscars. Because it's Florence Pugh and Kathy Bates and Laura Dern and Margot Robbie and Scarlett Johansson. Mm-hmm. Look, I think they're all great. I love them all, have loved so much of all of their work. There had to be someone else. There just had to be. Like, any of the women from Parasite would have been fine.
I mean, Lupita Nyong'o almost single-handedly kept that entire... Because that movie's wild.
Yeah.
It's wacky.
And she should have been for Best Actress, not supporting, also.
Sure.
But still, I totally agree with you. I mean, there just are so many... There were so many opportunities. And I was going through, and I couldn't possibly remember them right now, but I was looking through the movies that, like, got nominated, and I was like, yeah, any of the women from Parasite, and I was like, there just had to be so many of these movies nominated where a person or a woman of color specifically could have easily been nominated over the people that got nominated. And it blows my mind because... You know, I try not to take these things personally because I know that the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences has no idea who I am. But after so many years of being reprimanded and being told you need to fix your shit, for them to just, it feels like they're deliberately not making strides to be inclusive in a way that, like, is so disgusting. I can't even fathom how these people are still allowed to operate in society. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think we're definitely we're at a paradigm shift. And
I feel like we're in the last dying gasp of some shit, but I'm ready for it to go.
It's going to take 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the necessary steps to correcting it are being taken, because it's like, you know, I realized and have made a point to seek out information and entertainment that is outside of my comfort zone or my traditional, worldview. There was a handful of things I watched this year that I was like, I wasn't necessarily all that interested in it, but I was like, I feel like I should know what this is. Like, I feel like I should know about that. Like, I didn't actually want to like watch When They See Us as a piece of entertainment, but I was like, I'm familiar with this story. It gets used as a talking point. I have, a lot of respect and admiration for so many people involved. I'm going to sit down and watch this. And it's like, or even, oh God, what was that one? There's no point in me even bringing this up because I can't remember. It was an HBO movie and it was an original movie and it was a retelling of a novel. Oh. It wasn't Invisible Man. I know that is a novel, but it was good. I caught like the end of it and it, yeah, no, that's all just Elizabeth Moss. Native Son.
Oh, I heard of that.
I caught it on TV last year and it was interesting. And so I checked the guide and it was coming on again. And so I watched it and it was really interesting. It was good. And I was like, that's something that I wouldn't have ever pursued otherwise. You know what I mean? If I hadn't turned on the TV with HBO still on, you were watching it the last night.
Sure.
And it caught my attention and I feel, better for having seen it. It was very interesting. I
feel that way about so many movies and I do still have some blind spots. Like for this year, like I haven't seen Honey Boy, which was apparently amazing. I haven't seen a handful of things, especially that were, sorry?
I said I wanted to see that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's coming out soon, I think, or it already is streaming on Amazon. We're going to watch it relatively soon, but I feel so much richer for having gone kind of on a whim to go see Parasite at the Enzian. And like, I'm glad that Parasite is nominated for some shit, but like literally 2 out of 20 acting awards are people of color. And it's Antonio Banderas and Cynthia Erivo. And I'm just like, there were other people in those movies too, which like Harriet takes place during the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, it's like Black people can get awards. Black people can get awards for things other than period pieces.
Oh my God, thank you. Other than being a slave, I would love it. I would love it so much. Like Lupita would have been so great. That's
the 1-2 punch because it's also a genre film, and you know how we feel. I'm telling the audience knows how we feel about the way genre is snubbed because, in particular, horror, fantasy sneaks in there sometimes, but. Yeah. Anyways, yeah.
Well, let's talk about Little Women and be happy again. We came back from seeing Greta Gerwig's Little Women and we liked it. And we're going to talk about it now.
Okay, sure. We saw it yesterday and I specifically wanted to think about it for a while, but you were it was the kind of thing where it was like, it seemed like you were getting more and more nervous because you had hyped it up so much.
Yeah.
That you thought I wasn't gonna like it all that much.
Well, I thought I maybe had gotten you to a place where you were going to expect too much from it.
Mm-hmm. We all know how I have a tendency to be kind of contrary. Like, it's like if everybody's going one way, sometimes I think, well, I don't feel like going that way. I'm going to go the other way. And I got to say that there was no part really of this movie that didn't work for me.
Yay!
And it was just right out of the gate. There was something just magnetic about it. And I did the thing where I was, not even halfway in, like maybe a quarter way in, and I just had a big smile. And I was like, I am loving this. And how she managed to capture the like integrity of the story, like the old fashionedness of it, but also make it feel so fresh and relevant. And it's
That's what everyone has been saying.
Because you think about how much has changed in 200 years, and also not a lot's changed, to be perfectly honest. And I only took a couple notes, but one of the first words I wrote was just divine feminine. It was such a female voice and perspective. And there's a handful of men in it, and it's very much like I felt the way that I think a lot of like, women feel in men movies, where it's like they're observing this world that they're not part of. And
I'm so glad you brought that up so early because it's one of the things I wanted to talk about the most. I also only took a couple of notes, and this is the second time I've seen it, and I like couldn't pull my eyes away from the screen to write more stuff down. But the way that the movie is framed adaptations of Little Women are always framed around the Little Women, Marmee and the four girls, and Hannah, obviously. But the way that Greta framed so many scenes so that you understand the way the men are outside looking in is fascinating to me. There is specifically one scene about halfway through where Marmee has to go to DC to see Mr. March because he's been injured in the war. And the girls and Hannah and Marmee are all running around getting ready, trying to like help Marmee pack. And Mr. March and Laurie and John Brooke are standing off to the side in a way that implies both uselessness and great concern. And also they all are so knowing that they're on the outside looking in. And they're also kind of in awe of
it's
the
like
women.
A privilege.
It's like, yes, it's like a privilege to watch this family of women operate, and they understand that privilege, and I don't know how she managed to get all of them to convey the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have words for this movie, and I'm afraid I'm going to start crying at like any minute because I loved it so much.
In retrospect, I am actually very glad that you went ahead and made me watch the 90s version first, because I think any issues I would have had understanding it got riddled out with that.
Yeah,
and
that was part of my reasoning.
The 90s, because there's a handful of times, if I have one criticism of this movie, there's a handful of times where I did slightly lose sense of the timeline.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
I charted it with Amy's bangs. If she had bangs, it was the past.
That is how you do it.
But watching the first one, it's very much, to me, it was sort of a series of events. It was sort of like, I didn't really connect with them all that much. And again, we already talked about it. I think in its time, it was probably excellent, but it just didn't. This one resonated with me so much more.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of like, oh, I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to fall down, and then we're going to fight, because this is the part where we fight, and now we make up. Where it's like, watching this one, if you were to ask me what this one is about, like, I would go so broad. I would be like, it's about life, it's about family, it's about romance. And another thing that this movie really, I actually have, like, the hair on my arm is standing up right now. A handful of movies do this for me. Weirdly, Captain America, the first Avenger, does it, where it gives me this sense of, like, doughy-eyed, like, Americana. Like,
yeah.
Like the Main Street USA of Walt Disney World, where it's like witnessing something so quintessentially American. And it's like, now is a time where we're, there's not a lot of, patriotism, like flags on our sleeves at this moment.
There is, but it's the wrong kind.
Well, yeah. And so it's like watching something like this, I was like, this is what we're supposed to be. This is what the country is. And just the things about it, that qualities that seemed so American, the winters, the summers, I love that Christmas is such an integral part of it, because it's like, Christmas is, honestly a very American thing. It's like, obviously they celebrate it around the world, but we kind of have
we kind of have the market corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. That they're also, because I've read and listened to a lot of interviews with Greta Gerwig specifically, and one of the biggest things she wanted to convey was like a longing to go back to childhood for Joe specifically. And that's why there's one point where I think it's Beth asks if Joe misses Laurie, and she says, I miss everything. And it's because they are never together as a family again after he like proposes to her and she turns him down. And there's this like deep longing in the movie for being able to be the person that you were before you had to grow up. It's wild.
I kept thinking about my grandmother's house through the entire movie.
Yeah.
And like, which is particularly hard on me because we sold it this year.
Yeah.
And my grandfather built it with his bare hands, like quite literally with a hammer and a nail. Like he didn't oversee construction. and it was just this kind of like, we always joke that it was this fortress on a hill, because it quite literally was. And when you think about like a time before, our modern, like I think I could never live without TV or phone or radio or internet or whatever. And then to watch something like this, I'm like, oh, not only could I do it, part of me actually longs for that. Like, part of me actually, the scene, just every single character I got more of a sense from. The two absolute standouts, possibly three, is Amy. She's, in my opinion, she's the most dynamic character apart from Joe. I still don't like Meg. She's fine.
Fair.
She's fine.
but will you at least agree that this gave Meg a lot more?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's not that I think Emma was bad or anything like that. I just, Meg's not a character I gravitate towards.
No, of course not.
And then weirdly, I cannot remember his name, but Chris Cooper.
Mr. March. Or no, sorry, Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, I had no idea who that man was in the old version. And like,
well,
I was
it was actually John Neville.
Was it really? I know who John Neville is, and I didn't even. He was nothing to me in the old version. I was like, was he in more than one scene?
He's only in a couple, yeah.
But Chris Cooper, he had such a weird warmth, and just the scene when Beth comes to play the piano for the first time.
Yeah.
And he just walks down the stairs, and he's hiding from her. And he just kind of sits on the stairs, and does he even start crying? Like,
he does. He starts crying. He starts like sort of conducting her, and then he just like sits there and cries because he's thinking about his daughter who died.
It says so much more than what it, like I said, like what this is about is so, like, I think that this, obviously, and it's having a rather robust life right here and right now, but I think this is but the beginning of a very long life for this work of art.
Yeah. This is going to be the quintessential adaptation.
The definitive, yeah.
Absolutely.
And the decision, you were so right, the decision to tell the story through the flashbacks was brilliant. And I don't always love that.
No, I mean, as evidenced by our most recent episode about The Witcher, we were both very confused about the timelines, but because of the way that she frames it as a longing to go back to when times were simpler, I think it works so much better to have Joe remembering all of these times that were so good and so formative for her while she's going through a great personal upheaval.
Well, and like even the tonal, not necessarily tonal shifts, but it's like having Amy burning the book and then Joe rescuing Amy from the pond. In told linearly, that feels almost like lazy writing. There's something about it that's just kind of like, oh, okay. But then telling it through a flashback, it's sort of like, it's not the dichotomy, but it's like having the two scenes kind of clash. The sibling relationship is something, because not only, like I said, it's divine feminine, but it is very family. And it's like, I have, one brother, and he is very different from me in a lot of ways. And I do not agree with a lot of the decisions he makes. But there is a thing where it's like, at the end of the day, I know I have somewhere to go. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I at the end of the day, I have my brother. It's like...
Well, I don't know what you mean, because it's just me. But I understand.
It's slightly different than a friend. You know what I mean?
Because I assume.
Well, because you obviously, you have the shared history, and also it's like if you were assigned a friend and you were stuck with them for your whole life.
Well, but also nobody else has had the same growing up experience as you, except for Andrew. And I understand that. And I think that is this story in general, like the book and the old movie even, but this one especially, I have never wanted a sister more. And it's like, it's not even just for the like lovely parts, but it's like when Amy gets her foot stuck in the plaster because she's making a mold for Laurie to show that she has lovely, nice feet, and her foot gets stuck and Joe just starts cackling. That's that is fascinating to me. And I think that's such an interesting part of this movie is that they obviously love each other so much, but they are very quick to laugh at one another's misfortune.
Yeah. I said recently that it's like, from a psychological standpoint, we actually probably shouldn't go to middle school. We shouldn't be together during those ages. And the primary reason is because we have the ability to hurt each other, but we don't have the understanding to know not to do it. Like to know why we shouldn't. And so people, sure, people who study this shit say that we should actually probably take like a several year break where we do other like community work and stuff and then go into high school. And it was all very fascinating, but all of that is to say that you know, when you grow up with a sibling, you're learning so many social things in real time from them. And there is very real moments where Andrew and I hurt each other just to see if we could.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's being a girl in middle school.
Yeah. And
that's
was
all
like,
it is.
And I remember there's 2 separate incidents where he made me mad. And one of the times I quite literally just picked up and broke his train. It was under the Christmas tree. And the second I did it, I was like, shit.
That was a bad thing.
I went too far. And this movie really captures that in a way. And having not read the book and having only seen the 90s version, in particular with Amy, I think that it's easy to be like, ugh, Amy, she's such a brat. Where it's like this movie gives her a fascinating character and a fascinating arc. And the third one,
I think Amy makes so much more sense in this version than any other version I've ever seen.
Because I think that Greta was mining what was behind the words.
Yeah.
And not...
that's what this is the most perfect distillation of Little Women, and what if Louisa May Alcott were alive today, this is what she would have wanted.
Yeah, and because I said there were 2 characters, and possibly a third. The third was Aunt March, where it's like, I mean, Meryl Streep, she never ceases to surpass my expectations. So she just is that charming, but it's like a character like Aunt March. She was so much more complex to me in this one because she's old and she's mean, but she's also smart. And
she's very canny.
Yeah, and it's like, even if she represents an outdated worldview in a changing time, and even though her worldview is outdated, you shouldn't completely discount her.
Yeah, she's still right. And because it also, what was interesting to me, one of the things that I read is that it was Meryl Streep actually who suggested the speech that Amy gives to Laurie about being married, about having, being a woman who gets married, because Meryl Streep was like, the audience needs to understand why it's so important for Amy to get married. And it's because that we are so far past that. We're like, I marry Will because I love him, not because he has money, because he doesn't and we don't. And that's not a huge concern anymore for women, because I can make my own money and I have my own credit card and, all kinds of stuff like that. But at the time, what she says specifically about any money I earned would belong to him immediately, and my children would be his. They would be his property. That is important for us to know. And that does also shade Amy, because we didn't know that before. You know what I mean? In previous adaptations, that's not made clear that she has to do this not only for her family, but for herself.
And that could be something that was lost over time.
For sure. I'm sure
that understanding of her.
Yeah, I'm sure it absolutely was. And I just think that Florence Pugh and allowing Florence Pugh to play young and old Amy is very good.
It feels necessary.
It feels necessary, and also she was very good at playing 13-year-old Amy.
My favorite thing about her was how funny and weird she was. And I mean, when you are that beautiful, and especially when she was in, Europe wearing the beautiful clothes and stuff, it's like, you can afford to be quirky. You can afford to be, for sure. And maybe not quirky, but
a little unusual
and blunt, and I liked that. I liked the personality. I liked how vivacious and raucous the whole thing was, and it was just so beautiful. It was so lavish, but not at a point where it sacrifices, because it's like, I'm in a very Sofia Coppola walked so Greta Gerwig could run place right now.
I could get behind that opinion for sure.
Where it's like, this is kind of like what Sophia did with Marie Antoinette, only completely sticking the landing.
Yeah.
It just really was that good. And so much of it is in what isn't said. It's like, all of the usual beats are there. All of the usual plot points are there. But even just Joe and Laurie dancing outside between the windows,
So, okay, I think I mentioned before on the show, but definitely on Twitter, I was initially looking forward to this because I really do love Greta Gerwig, and I really liked Lady Bird, and I am extremely anxious to see the future of her career, because I think she can kind of do whatever she feels like. But I was initially very hesitant about this because I do love the 94 version, even recognizing its flaws. That was my version of this story. And I didn't necessarily feel that any of the girls were cast properly when I was thinking about it. But again, I was thinking about it through the lens of the 94 version, in which they're all archetypes and not really people. And I was very against Timothee Chalamet as Laurie because he is just a little elfin boy and Christian Bale was like a whole man. Mm-hmm. And they were somehow like the same age when they both made these movies. So I was very against it at first. And then they released that scene, the dance scene. It's like the scene in the parlor first when she tells him that she scorched her dress and Meg wouldn't let her go. And I watched that scene and I watched the dance and I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna fucking love this. Because they both were so perfect as their characters. And I think it's because they've already worked together and because they're like friends in real life. But you just could feel the relationship the way that it's immediately supposed to be. And that was the moment that sold me on it. And it fits so perfectly where it is in the movie also.
Well, and also, I mean, think about life. Like, there's the guy, you know, in your class who you think is absolutely dreamy and he's your, like, ideal person. And oftentimes the guy that you end up developing feelings for is not that guy. Like...
Yeah, it's, like, almost never that guy.
And so that's the kind of thing where it's, like, he's not, like, he wasn't the dreamboat in the way that Christian Bale was, but it was, like, he certainly earned his place there.
I will say... I find Timothee Chalamet a much more appealing Laurie in general because...
He had the, like, broody thing down.
He was very good at brooding and very good at being, like, a scoundrel in Paris in a way that Christian Bale, as much as I love him, really comes off like a sociopath. Like, a lot of the time. Which is what makes him so great at American Psycho, but, like, less suited to something like this. So I ended up doing a complete 180 on Timothée Chalamet, and I mean, I like him better than Christian Bale now.
Okay.
As Laurie. I like them all better than...
Because that's actually, speaking of Timothée Chalamet, that's another thing that this movie kept reminding me of, and not just because of him, but it was reminding me of Call Me By Your Name, where it's like, they obviously tackle... Like, Call Me By Your Name is very blatantly sexual in a way that this is not, but it's like, it's touching on so many of the same themes and feelings and, like, emotions and the longing and the like, just, and I mean, maybe it's just all the fresh air and trees. I don't know. Maybe I need to be spending more time outside. Maybe that's my takeaway.
I mean, it could be any number of things, but I agree with you. I kind of felt that. I found the relationship between Joe and Laurie so much richer in this one. And I don't know if it's because Saoirse and Timothy are, like, close in real life, or if it was, like, on the page, or if Greta was just like, do it. But I found it so much more correct, I guess. It felt more real. It felt more in a way that you could understand how Laurie could believe that they were meant to be together, and also equally understand why Joe was like, absolutely not. I can't believe you even are entertaining this idea. Like, it
because
would
I didn't understand why she said no in the 90s one, and I got it in this one.
Yeah, exactly. And she's totally right. She's like, you need a lady for your manner, and I am very awkward, and I won't like that. It really speaks to a self-awareness that, like, Winona Ryder, as much as I love her, is not really capable of conveying.
Well, not at that time.
Not at the age of, like, 23.
Because the other thing also about, like, setting it out of sync, like, non-linearly, is it made it feel like one coherent work. Because when you're watching the 90s version, you reach a halfway point. And frankly, as I mentioned, I know it's because it was two books that have over time been combined. But telling it this way, it feels like a complete story versus being like, let's watch this entirely different story now. Like,
yeah, and I think it works especially well in the scenes with Beth's death. With Beth's illness versus her death. I mean, I can't even explain in the first place, how lovely Eliza Scanlon was in this movie, and also how she was able to imbue Beth with something more than just like goodness, like angelic goodness. She had desires in a way that have never been there before. Like, she looked at the piano the first time she went to the Lawrence's house. She looked at the piano with like a greedy face almost. And that's not like in a bad way, but in a like, I want it. And she's never had
covetous.
wants. Yeah, covetous. That's a good. And she's like, I've never experienced Beth as having wants and desires before. And so it was nice to see that. And she's a little petulant sometimes, and like she doesn't want to go see the Hummels by herself. And, you know, it's like so many moments with Beth and Meg specifically where like they never got enough before, and they got so much in this one. And so especially that juxtaposition of like Joe
That's the word
and
I was looking
Marmee.
for.
Huh?
That's the word I was looking for earlier. Go ahead.
Juxtaposition? Yeah. The juxtaposition of Joe and Marmee caring for Beth when she first gets scarlet fever, and Joe coming downstairs and finding them feeding Beth at the table because she feels better. And then later, when she comes down the stairs and Beth has died and Marmee is sitting by herself in the kitchen and she's just overcome and grabbing Joe because she's the only one there. Unbelievable to me how perfect that was.
And it's such a foregone conclusion the second time.
Yeah, you just know, and that the light is bluer, and like Joe is already, she doesn't come down the stairs as fast. You know, she like looking, and she just kind of knows, and it's absolutely Greta's direction, but it is Saoirse Ronan and Laura Dern's performances that sell it the most. And I went into this one before I saw it the first time, and especially before I saw any trailers, because the trailers really did end up selling me, but from a place of nostalgia, because I do understand that the old one is not as good, but I was coming at it and I was like, we already have like a definitive adaptation of it. Why are we doing this again? As much as I like Greta and all these people in it. And then it was like, I was watching it and I was like, how could I have ever believed that? You know what I mean? It really like rocked me a little the first time I saw it, and it did it just as much the second time. Like, I was absolutely crying from the moment the Sony logo came up until Joe has the book in her hands at the end.
That actually does bring me to my last few points, but I was going to say, I mentioned to you yesterday that I did cry. You were surprised? Because you were crying both. Well, I assume the first time. You were crying the second time.
Yes, no, both times I cried from the moment the Sony logo appeared on screen until the credits. The whole time. The one moment that I cried was, it wasn't Beth that got people, but it was when at the end when Amy approaches Joe. Oh my God, yes. And before excellent. She even started talking. Yeah. And I was just like, if I were Joe, I could have been spitting mad and I would have immediately been like, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, like, of course. And you wouldn't believe how many fights I've had with, you know, my brother and stuff, where it's like, I could be so mad. And if he would just be like, look, I'm sorry, then the entire thing, I'd be like, okay, you know what? It's fine. Let's get over it. Because in this one, it feels so perfect that Amy and Laurie end up together. Like it feels right in a way that it just felt convenient in the old one. And I love how good it is. And I do love that Laurie tells Joe in private first, because that's not the way it happens in the old one. And having Joe hear it from Laurie and hear the explanation and hear the reasoning behind it, I think is so much better. So she's warned before Amy just like pops up downstairs behind him. And so it gives her like a moment to get used to it. And then having Amy actually be contrite about it. And she's just like, it just happened so fast. And we like blah, 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 this and the other. And it just felt so perfect. And what is Joe gonna do? She didn't want him. And that I think is the most important part. And I love how much more that Joe and Marmee got together, specifically, obviously, that scene in the attic when after Beth dies and Joe is like, I think if he asks me again, I'll say yes. And she's like, but do you love him? And Joe says, well, do you think he'll ask me again? Joe's such a fascinating character, obviously, but I love the way that she and Marmee mirror each other in this one. because they're very, very similar, but Marmee has learned to grow past her faults in a way that Jo is still figuring out.
Mm-hmm. Well, she even says, she was like, I'm not patient.
Yeah.
Like, I've learned to become it out of necessity. But no, yeah. I was also going to say that this is one of the most successful book within a book storylines I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because with the 90s version, it had a very clunky, like, Little Women. Like, remember the fucking end of Game of Thrones when they, like, wrote a book and they're like, a Game of Thrones. And I'm like, But this one, it worked so much better. And also, possibly my single favorite part about the entire movie, and I can't tell if you're going to agree with me or going to argue me on this one, but I think the ending with Jo selling, the book to the publisher, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I think the ending leaves the entire story up in the air.
Yes, it does.
Because you're like, what about this is true?
I mean...
in a way that it's treated like Holy Scripture in other versions.
Well, I mean, because I am a traditionalist and because I have a soft spot for Dr. Bear, I believe she marries him. For me, I want Jo to marry Dr. Bear.
And that was a kiss for the ages.
Of course. But I also do agree that I like that quite a lot. And that's one of the things that Greta has said too, where she's like, she really wanted the like romance to be between Jo and her work and not Dr. Bear. Like, Dr. Bear is incidental. And I do like and appreciate that. I just choose to believe that they actually got married.
But I mean the whole thing. I mean, the entire story. There's a way you could watch that final scene and be like, did she make this entire thing up? Did
any of it happen? Does Jo actually have a sister? Yeah.
That's and it really just it was so winking and so clever that in a way that made it feel like now. It's like that's where we are right here and right now. Is like a knowing, sly wink.
Yeah.
And how, like I said, something so old could still feel true to its roots, but also resonate is... Well,
it also just feels so true to everything. It feels so real. To me as a woman, it feels very real. And I think to me as a human person, it feels very real. Like, these are all... None of it, even though it takes place in the 1860s, none of it feels especially dated other than, several like offside comments, kind of. It all feels very present and legitimate. And you said something earlier about it being very light, I think. And the literal first thing I wrote down was that it has an exuberance. It's just very, like, from the minute that Jo leaves the publisher at the beginning, she's just running down the street. And it's very light and it's very playful and it does have deep moments of emotion, but it's just so fun also.
Also just so efficient. Like, the hair curling scene... It's almost verbatim the same. Like, even some of the dialogue is the same, but it's
she lifted quite a lot straight from the book.
We're in and out of it in like 45 seconds in a way that took like 5 goddamn minutes in the 90s version. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I'm a very justice for Meg kind of person, and I did want to talk about Meg for like a minute.
Okay. Scrappy-Doo. Okay, continue.
Rude. Meg is better than Scrappy-Doo. That's the pull quote. It's very similar to my feelings about Beth in this movie, which is that I feel like Meg gets so much more to do and more that informs her as a character. Because again, in previous versions, she's a very like matronly presence and she really is only interested in getting married and having a baby.
She's such an archetype in a good way, not in a bland way, but because think of how many of your friends, were so beautiful and had so much potential and they stayed on their fucking hometown and got married and you know what I mean?
No,
and you just wanted to be like, run, like go for the stars. And that's a thing.
I totally understand that. And I appreciate that is Meg's character. She is that archetype, but I did appreciate how this version, again, gave her desires in a way that she was also very saintly and angelically good in previous versions. Like she wanted for nothing once she had John and her babies, and it like didn't even appear like it was a struggle or anything. And in this one, she really struggles with the bed she's made herself, no matter how much she does love John or her children. She buys $50 worth of silk that's not even a dress yet because she can't bear to say no in front of her wealthy friends. And that's such an interesting thing to explore. And they give it the time to breathe.
The wealthy girls were better executed in this one.
Also, yes.
Because they weren't like a pit of vipers.
Yeah.
And I mean, yes, I know that oftentimes those two things go hand in hand, but not necessarily. You know what I mean? Well, nuanced. It was more nuanced.
Yeah, I agree. And I had to say that. And I very specifically the line that she gives Joe where she says, just because my dreams are different than yours doesn't mean they're not worth something. I believe that. Some people do just, they want to have a family and they don't have great big crazy aspirations like Joe does. And I don't think that makes you any less valid as a human person. And I just like how Emma and Greta were both able to execute Meg in this telling. I thought they gave her just the right amount, just like with Beth.
Honestly, I mean, I could probably keep going. I would probably have to see it again and really sort of parse some more thoughts. But I think that definitely sums up my feelings after my first viewing. The
last thing I did want to say was because I didn't mention the whole thing, but I think one of the best parts of this movie is the speech that Joe gives in the attic to Marmee, because they are selling it on just the beginning part. When she's like, women have minds and souls as well as just hearts, and they're meant for more than just beauty. And she's making this beautiful speech about, essentially feminism and how women are just as good as men. And then she literally breaks down and just says, but I'm so lonely. And I think that they should be selling it harder on the whole thing, because that is such a universal feeling to be like, I know that I'm enough. I know that I have everything that I need to live, but I want something else. Like I want another person. And I think it's really, really such an interesting notion. And I think that is, in my opinion, probably the calling card of Greta Gerwig, because looking back on Lady Bird, that feeling is all over Lady Bird as well. And I just really cannot wait to see her keep exploring that feeling. My vote for Best Director, Greta Gerwig. All right. Well, obviously, we recommend Little Women. If you want to, you can follow us on Twitter @SoI'mWatching, Instagram @SoI'mWatchingThisShow. We are also on Facebook and Tumblr, So I'm Watching This Show. Everything links out from our website, soimwatching.com. And other than that, you can rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. And that's it for us.